Movies manipulate our emotions. I will not deny that that is the case, nor would I argue that it is inherently a bad thing for a musical beat or abrupt visual or even at times a logic-defying monologue to be used to sway our emotions in one direction or another. No, art is intended to challenge our perception of reality and introduce us to feelings and insights we may never have experienced otherwise. It's just a bonus when movies have coherent scripts beneath that. It's to the degree and manner in which art toys with our emotions where issues become apparent. Take for example the subjects of this video, 2017's Wind River and 2018's The Nightingale. Viewer discretion is advised as both of these films feature scenes of sexual abuse which are integral to the narratives and core messages of both films. Wind River sees a divorced Wyoming hunter, Corey Lambert, investigate the mysterious death of a young woman named Natalie, herself Native American and himself white. Racial tension plays a subtle role as the Wind River Reservation is noticeably derelict and its residents don't shy away from voicing how hopeless they feel for the future of their youths. In his investigation, Lambert and Jane Banner, the FBI agent tasked to Natalie's case, learn that she was raped sometime before death and died from the air in her lungs freezing as she ran 6 miles barefoot through the snow at night. Despite scant evidence, a crippling lack of resources, and owed to Lambert having lost a daughter of his own, with whom Natalie was friends, he takes a personal interest in finding those responsible for her horrible demise. The Nightingale follows Claire, a devoted wife and mother and Irish captive of a British lieutenant named Hawkins. By law, Claire has the right to travel as a free woman provided that Hawkins write a letter of approval. Every time Claire confronts him about the letter, he either stonewalls or deflects into guilt-tripping for having saved her from imprisonment. He uses his power over Claire to rape her, and when she and her husband Aiden decide that enough is enough, Hawkins rapes her again in front of Aiden, murders him, permits his sergeant to rape Claire, and then orders a rookie to shut up the crying baby. All of this happens in the first half hour and sets Claire off on a journey of revenge, accompanied only by her native guide Billy. Racial tension plays an overt role as this film takes place in British-occupied Tasmania and the locals are being enslaved and slaughtered. At first glance, these two films look nothing alike, but once you dig deeper into the subject matter, you'll find they are focused on sending very similar messages, and more importantly, manipulate our emotions to meet similar ends. Both Wind River and The Nightingale are about the victimization of women and native populations. The key difference being that Wind River is primarily concerned with telling a captivating story, while The Nightingale's believability suffers from, among other things, letting the message overshadow the narrative. Worse yet is the manner in which Claire's trauma is portrayed in order to garner our investment. The inciting incident is Claire being raped twice while she watched her husband and baby be murdered. As with emotional manipulation, there is nothing inherently wrong with shock art. There's merit in being offended to such an extent that you get PTSD. One of art's implicit goals is to stick with us long after it's been observed, after all. A Clockwork Orange and Eyes Wide Shut have stood the test of time as examples of shock art that serve a greater purpose than simply upsetting the viewer, and they have stories that function on every level without the knowledge of their deeper meanings. While The Nightingale's message of female empowerment takes center stage at the tail end of the plot, it is not integrated into the otherwise believable world and is too shallow to justify the misery porn that preceded it. That is what The Nightingale is: misery porn. Gratuitous emotional gerrymandering that forces you into one of two states of mind, either being completely emotionally invested in Claire's struggle and empathizing with her desire for revenge, or being entirely removed from the experience because you can see exactly how the filmmakers are trying to pull your strings. Guess which team I'm on? So, the morning after Claire's life-changing ordeal, she sets out for revenge with nothing but a musket she can't operate, a horse, some basic supplies, and her wilderness guide Billy. Her first victim being the rookie who killed her baby, wounded after he was separated from Hawkins' caravan. She butchers him in a manner brutally unique to someone in her position. But this is not Taken or The Foreigner. Claire is not a highly skilled warrior, but a psychologically damaged widow. She struggles, fails, tries again, and fails again. This crusade is difficult for her, and that, in conjunction with the world building and performances, helps ground the film in reality. As far as I know, none of this actually happened, but it could have. Within the narrative, these elements gel with each other to create a strong sense of internal consistency, all of which culminate in a very believable fictional experience. That element of believability is undermined when Claire climactically confronts Hawkins, and despite her having shot at him and possessing an unmistakable bloodlust for him in particular, he does not immediately deal with her. He has the authority and good reason to have her arrested on the spot, but all he does is threaten to kill her if he ever sees her again, the dramatic equivalent of the hyper-powerful boss-like enemy throwing the protagonist around when they could just as easily tear them apart. Hawkins' negligence gives Claire the opportunity to follow him into a pub populated by his military peers where she sings at him, while everyone around them looks on in awkward silence. This moment is at least thematically resonant. Early on, Aiden told Hawkins that Claire was a free woman, to which he responded, "No, she's my property." And during her monologue she declares, "I belong to me and no one else!" A message that is frequently echoed in today's cultural landscape but was undoubtedly unpopular back then, to the point that it warrants the question, were women in 1825 even aware of female empowerment or gender equality? Considering how often we're told about the oppression of women in history, wouldn't it make sense for a period piece to portray a woman for whom submission is so normal that she doesn't question it, and in turn suffers an entirely different type of trauma that is arguably more powerful because it more closely resembles reality? Rather than the writers reaching through the screen to depict currently trending ideas via a story in which characters are surprisingly accommodating to a woman who is established to have no agency. While Claire's symbolic defeat of Hawkins is in keeping with the message of the film, it betrays its believability. Whereas in Wind River, Natalie's death is a mystery. Forensics revealed that she was raped, possibly multiple times, but the protagonists can't fathom how she ended up in the middle of nowhere in her pajamas. The nearest shelter was 6 miles away at an oil rig. After finding the body of Natalie's boyfriend Matt, himself security personnel at the facility, the investigation leads Banner and a handful of local officers to take a trip there in order to ask some questions. The atmosphere quickly becomes uneasy as one of the deputies suspects the base's private security of trying to surround them. Banner diffuses the situation and continues to insist that they be granted access to Matt's trailer. One silky smooth transition later and we're taken back in time to the night Matt and Natalie died. After some pillow talk about their future together, the lovebirds are rudely interrupted by the other crew members returning from a night of drinking. Tensions mount as the dubious men encroach further and further into Matt's room until fighting breaks out and the victorious drunken majority seize their opportunity. This moment is accompanied by no music and framed with harrowing composure as the complicit men await their turns. Matt musters the strength to get back up and buy Natalie enough time to escape. I cannot stress just how dissimilar these two films are in their portrayals of sexual trauma. The Nightingale's repeated gratuitous use of rape scenes, although justified within the context of the story, does not lend itself to the viewer's immersion or investment. I will admit, having Matt and Natalie discuss their intentions to move to a small town he told her about in a sentiment-filled story right before they're raped and killed sounds a bit overboard. It is easily the most heartstring tugging aspect of the plot. After all, if Matt was not particularly nice to Natalie or just a boring individual, his sacrifice would not have had the same impact on the viewer. Although this whole scene serves as emotionally manipulative backstory, nothing about it conflicts with the other elements of the film's narrative or themes. Wind River plays it like any detective story or serialized cop show would, by showing you the body, revealing the victim was raped, and further investigating the crime. The film then takes a massive departure from this well-established trend by flashing back to the time of the crime, developing the victim's character, and showing her rape in sickening detail. Back in the present, the investigation turns lethal as the facility's crew opens fire on the officers, leading to a shootout that kills all involved except Banner and Pete, Natalie's rapist, who escapes. Well, that's awfully convenient, isn't it? The one character best suited for a climactic confrontation makes it out of the shooting gallery. Likely? Not really. Justified? Yes, entirely. When Banner asks the guards why their faces are banged up, they excuse the suspicious marks as an occupational hazard, on account of speeding through thick forest on snowmobiles and all. And they can get away with that, sure. But not Pete. He got the most of Matt's attention that night and has no way of hiding it from authorities short of literally hiding in Matt's trailer, greatly increasing his chances of surviving the shootout. So Lambert comes out of the woodwork to check on Banner and assures her that he will catch the runaway, now wounded and totally out of his element. What follows is an emotionally gratifying conclusion of Shakespearean proportions. Lambert drives Pete to the top of a mountain and simply talks to him. Pete is agitated and uses the tedium of his work environment to rationalize his behavior. Maintaining his poise, Lambert asks what it is that Pete did, and he admits to having raped Natalie. But Lambert is a man of his word, and because Pete told the truth, he'll give him a chance. 6 miles to the nearest highway, barefoot through the snow. The same chance she had.
I want you to run.
Claire's defeat of Hawkins is symbolic and incongruous with her journey leading up to it. Lambert's defeat of Natalie's rapists is decisive and definitive. Claire overcomes her trauma and asserts her sovereignty, possibly humiliating Hawkins, that part is bizarrely unclear. Lambert reconciles the loss of his daughter with the justice he gets for Natalie by condemning Pete to die just as she did. Both characters' victories were poetic, but only one of them was tangible. As I mentioned earlier, these films also have a racial component to them. Guess which one did it better? Billy is Claire's Tasmanian wilderness guide, and although their relationship starts off mired by the racial stigmas typical for the period, they grow to respect each other and effectively team up by the third act. And then, 1 hour and 49 minutes in, we learn that Billy's tribe is gone, and that he is the lone survivor. The news is delivered via a group of captured natives, themselves the last of their tribe, who are gunned down for speaking up as quickly as they appeared on screen. Did I ever tell you the definition of misery porn? The news of his tribe's demise motivates Billy to get his own revenge after Claire tries and fails to explain to him what a symbolic victory is. He plants a spear in both Hawkins and the sergeant, who, besides what they did to Claire, are also guilty of raping and killing a totally random native woman and not taking Uncle Charlie's prank too well. Mortally wounded from a gunshot, Billy is helped to a beach where he and Claire watch the sunrise while she sings some more. The film ends somewhat unceremoniously as, despite getting their respective revenge, we don't know if Billy survives his injury or what fate of the million possibilities befalls Claire. Now that Hawkins is dead, there's no one to legalize her citizenship. But maybe that doesn't matter because the journey she's been on is all the validation she needs, I don't fucking know. Throughout Wind River, there are references to natives ending up in prison, and from what we see of the reservation, it's run down and not at all conducive to fostering accountability or respect from its youth.
Hey, don't look at me. I'm used to no help.
After visiting an injured Banner in the hospital, Lambert goes to give Natalie's father the news. He's already heard. One man is still missing. Lambert assures him that no one is missing.
How'd he go out? With a whimper.
They sit in solace, and before the credits roll, we're shown two brief but poignant quotes. While missing person statistics are compiled for every other demographic, none exist for Native American women. No one knows how many are missing. Although such statistics may very well exist now, it's clear from simple research that director Taylor Sheridan tried to find the numbers during production and was unable to. After the climactic shootout, after the loose ends have been neatly tied up, after the movie is finished, we get two chilling sentences explaining what it was all about. This film was in service of one unthinkable fact, and you could have watched the whole thing without knowing it. It functions on every level, giving the viewer both a compelling story and something to think about long after. Not only is Wind River's core message both tastefully portrayed and woven organically into the narrative, it is a message of real-world problems and consequences. The Nightingale's message is more concerned with self-determination and achieving a sense of agency from within, which is an important message all the same. I don't want to be misconstrued as saying that its ideas are not worth entertaining simply because they clash with other factors. But in The Nightingale, Billy's motivation for revenge is introduced in the final 20 minutes and is facilitated by a group of captive natives telling him exactly what he would need to hear to want to kill the characters that Claire leaves alive. It feels tacked on and shoehorned into an already bloated runtime, as though halfway through production they realized Billy didn't have an ending and so crammed these scenes in, potentially at the expense of Claire's ending. Okay, Wind River and The Nightingale are drastically different movies, addressing the same ideas in drastically different ways, but they're so tonally distinct and designed to elicit such unique emotions in viewers that it's not fair to compare them on their admittedly similar subject matters, right? Well, sure, if you'd like to go the road of ignoring everything I said up until now because themes are too amorphous to make definitive criticisms of, then there is one final nail in the coffin I have yet to mention. The villains. The security crew, but mainly Pete, and the British soldiers, but mainly Hawkins. Where to begin? Besides the flashback to the night of Natalie's death, we have the same amount of time with these men as Banner and Lambert have. We see them acting suspect but maintaining plausible deniability. We see the truth of what happened to Natalie and Matt in their final moments, and within seconds after the flashback concludes, bullets fly, bringing the protagonist's motivation to survive in alignment with our desire to see the antagonists die. We are given a brief glimpse into the security guards' lives, an intoxicated crime one night and their desperate attempt to cover up that crime on a different day. They are not born and bred villains, they're just ethically bankrupt and willing to take advantage of people in loathsome ways. They may never have done anything so questionable before that night, or they may just be fundamentally bad people, but they're believable all the same. We don't have much to go on to judge their overall character, but the few things they do while on screen fully justifies what happens to them. The best evidence for their evil being calculated rather than impulsive is the sinister professionalism they exhibit while lying to authorities, as though they've done this before and are just following routine. Hawkins, on the other hand, is an unbridled abomination. Despite being characterized by raping and murdering people in every other scene, the filmmakers do not trust you to know that he is the bad guy. He is present for the duration of the whole movie, and all his screen time is spent giving you reasons to hate him. We get no impression of his aptitude or competence as a soldier. He has no redeeming qualities. Even the time spent not being a mustache-twirling, evil-loving villain he uses to lord his grandeur over an unwitting peasant boy who he eventually murders in a fit of rage. Pete is not Satan's born, he's just a pathetic man whose circumstances gave him cause to do horrible things. There's nothing special about him, or the rest of the crew. Their relation to Banner and Lambert is incidental as part of the investigation, whereas Hawkins' entire existence is dedicated to making others suffer to his own petty benefit. Yet another thing the Nightingale does to facilitate an emotional payoff that betrays its own believability. And let's not forget the staggering difference that emotional manipulation plays in both these films. Wind River is primarily a mystery thriller that surprises the viewer with its portrayal of Native American adversity and female sexual trauma. The Nightingale is reliant on its oppressive depiction of rape and staples on an oppressive depiction of native Tasmanian victimization in order to facilitate nebulous emotional payoffs. Wind River trusts the viewer to come to their own conclusions after delivering a powerful and memorable message. The Nightingale lets its narrative suffer by shoving its message down your throat at every opportunity. The type of people who live in blissful ignorance of tragedies within minority communities may just be shocked awake by Wind River. The type of people who need to be repeatedly told that rape is wrong will not be cured of their affliction by The Nightingale. TLDR, I watched The Nightingale and thought it was a good movie, just not for me. A week later, it dawned on me that Wind River did all the same things better, and I have since developed a new appreciation for it while simultaneously realizing how bad The Nightingale is, in comparison and by itself. Wind River's narrative is cogent and serves a message of quantifiable importance. The Nightingale's plot is at odds with its portrayal of self-empowerment, which, while undoubtedly helpful to victims of abuse of any kind, is limited to the confines of an otherwise mediocre movie. Wind River is a coherent film. The Nightingale is a heavy-handed public service announcement. And for those who will argue that The Nightingale has objectively superior shot composition or cinematography, just remember that Wind River has this. As always, I love discussion and debate, so if you have any criticism of my takes on either of these films, then let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you next time.